Welcome. I'm John Bagnulo. I'm excited to be with you today. We're going to really dive into the role of a very unique but powerful molecule that's concentrated in berries more than any other group of foods, and that is the anthocyanin, which is a really fascinating molecule, and it's timely. It's actually 20 years ago this month that I received my PhD, which was almost entirely focused on the role of anthocyanins in human health and their ability to prevent disease. So it's great to do this on that 20th anniversary. Anthocyanins, and I'll just start by saying that I serve as the director of nutrition for Nutritional Medicinals, who manufacture functional formularies, enteral formulas. So some of you may be familiar with those products. But going into my goals for us today, I really want everyone to understand what anthocyanins are. What makes them a very potent, maybe the most powerful antioxidant that occurs regularly in nature. I would like everyone to be able to explain how these molecules, these polyphenols, can mitigate oxidative stress, which is obviously at the core of so many chronic diseases, along with inflammation. Obviously, it's going to be important, for at the conclusion of this, for us to be able to identify where anthocyanins are found, what the richest sources of those are. And lastly, I'd really like participants to be able to explain how the consumption of anthocyanin-rich fruits, and in some cases, other vegetables, can significantly reduce an individual's risk for a variety of chronic diseases. And there are some really strong associations now that have been drawn between anthocyanin consumption and particular disease patterns. So, with that said, let's dive in and really tackle the biochemistry here first. This shows you the 6 different anthocyanins that are present in foods, commonly present. And if you look at these and you have any understanding of organic chemistry, you quickly note that you have more than one of those, what we call classic benzene rings. Those are the hexagons that you see here with the double bonds in them. And that is what makes these molecules, these anthocyanins, that's what makes them a polyphenol. Phenol structure, poly, obviously more than one, and all of those hydroxyl groups, which are represented here by the OH side chains coming off of those hexagons, those are really where the magic occurs with anthocyanins, because that is, in essence, that is the reason that they have the ability to donate electrons to free radicals, to make those free radicals more stable, less damaging to our cellular components. And really, look, that's what an antioxidant is. An antioxidant is a molecule that can donate an electron to create an even number of electrons in another molecule that would otherwise be a free radical and would have the ability to create significant instability in various areas of our physiology. And so the most powerful antioxidants out there are those which have the greatest ability to donate electrons. And you can see here that in the case of these anthocyanins, you have 6 of these side chains or more, all of which can provide very quickly that electron to really stabilize a potentially very damaging molecule. And another way to look at these is with their color. So all 6 of these anthocyanins, these structures, are associated with a different type of either purple, red, sometimes pink color, and sometimes such a very, very dark purple, such as the case with delphinidin. It doesn't look as dark in this slide, because if it were that dark, you wouldn't actually be able to make out the ring structures behind that color. But in the case of the skin of an eggplant, in the case of elderberries, or black currants, when you look at the pigments of those particular sources of anthocyanins, which we'll talk about in a moment, they're extremely dark. And the reason that anthocyanins occur The reason that they occur in nature is they basically act as a sunscreen for fruits. They protect the inner flesh of the fruit or vegetable. In some cases, they really protect the flesh of that plant from intense and potentially damaging ultraviolet light. So that's why they occur. And that's why they're almost always concentrated. 95% or more of the anthocyanins are going to be found in that outermost layer of any fruit or plant. And sometimes they're concentrated in leaves as well. There's a very high concentration, for instance, in the leaves of blueberries, not just in the fruit. And this ability, the ability to donate electrons and to have anti-oxidative effects and anti-inflammatory effects, we know that is critical to the etiology of most chronic diseases. So you see here on the left of this slide all of the potential sources of oxidative stress. Now look, oxidative stress is the result of free radicals washing over our physiology, whether that's our DNA, our mitochondria, which we'll spend most of our time talking about today. That oxidative stress is very damaging, but the root cause of the oxidative stress is from the free radicals. Now, again, some of those free radicals come from exogenous sources, right? Pollution, contaminants in water, in our food supply, the exhaust from automobiles. A lot of that, that free radical pool, and ultimately the oxidative stress that it causes are also coming from endogenous metabolism. So, just normal metabolism of food, the metabolism that gets really upregulated when we get into endurance events and cardiovascular exercise. Some of that is healthy. And you can see at the bottom of this slide, the physiological reactive oxygen species in the green on the side of that balance scale. I mean, look, we need some free radicals. We need some oxidative stress because it does serve as a stimulant to growth. It has, really important roles in stimulating the proper immune response. So I'm not, in any way intending to portray oxidative stress as something that's always harmful, but it's when it becomes pathological, when it starts to cause disease, that that's really the level of reactive oxygen species and oxidative stress that we're trying to address and are trying to mitigate or prevent it from ever reaching those levels. And once you start to look at all the potential sources, from things as common as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, obviously cigarette smoke, but infection is a big one. Infection is a huge cause of oxidative stress and chronic oxidative stress, because white blood cells basically use free radicals to destroy virally infected cells and to destroy bacteria. And when our white blood cells launch this chemical warfare against infections, well, again, it's important to arrest that infection, but with a chronic infection, those free radicals cause oxidative stress that damages the rest of our healthy physiology. So there are a lot of different places where free radicals are coming from, the sources of those. Ultimately, they're going to all contribute to oxidative stress, and it's the level of that oxidative stress that can become either the cause of disease or could potentially help us with other areas of physiology if they're at low to moderate levels. And having a diet that's rich in antioxidants has been shown time and time again to help prevent chronic disease, largely because it affects that pool of free radicals and oxidative stress in the body that we want to keep at a lower level. But you can see all the different chronic diseases and some, very debilitating neurodegenerative diseases that are clearly the result of excessive levels of oxidative stress that are never really brought into check through the proper antioxidant support. So that's, really this is the fundamental component of today's discussion. We're going to talk about anthocyanins and why they're so valuable, but this is it. This is the biggest role that they have in terms of protecting our physiology against excessive levels of free radicals and the subsequent oxidative stress. And the molecule itself, which we've, you now kind of get a sense for what it looks like. If we look at that molecule, it's got so many different qualities that make it potentially the most useful nutrient. It's not really talked about like a nutrient per se, but you could easily describe anthocyanins as though they were a vitamin. You look at vitamin E and you look at the role that vitamin E plays in the body. Yeah, we have an RDA for it, right? We have a certain amount that every individual has to receive over the course of whether it's a day or two. You could make that argument for anthocyanins because of their unique ability to affect so many areas of our physiology, how compatible they are with us. I mean, they're never an antigen, so they never cause, any type of allergenic reaction. They're very compatible with our physiology, very safe even at high levels, and they affect such critical areas of a cell, the organelles in a cell, and then collectively have just an enormous ability to influence things as important as our blood-brain barrier. So you look at those qualities, and then secondary to that, you look at the areas of our physiology that benefit from regular anthocyanin consumption and availability, and just so many areas of our nervous system, right? The brain, the eyes, as well as other areas. You look at the renal system, how the blood and hemodynamics in our blood change, the reproductive system, obviously our liver. There's just and cardiovascular health is clearly influenced by anthocyanins. So you've got the mechanism in place. We've got so much research now illustrating the benefits of anthocyanin consumption in larger quantities as opposed to lower quantities. It's really just a remarkable molecule. Again, I spent around 3 or 4 years of my life studying that in my PhD work, some of which I'll share with you a little later. But this molecule has just, amongst all the polyphenols and all of the phytonutrients that are out there, you could make an argument that anthocyanins are number one in their ability to offer optimal human health when they're included as part of a regular diet. And these are some of those mechanisms that offer neuroprotective effects. We know that anthocyanins, prevent small, dense LDLs from being oxidized, and that's really one of the main components to heart disease. We'll talk a little bit later today around why it is anthocyanins are protective against obesity and diabetes. Again, the antioxidant properties are there. It's it's just a very, very fascinating molecule, and these just really get to the heart of those mechanisms and the ability to change the etiology of different diseases. So now let's really talk about where they're found and I'll try to provide some clarity around the richest sources. Now, when we say the richest source overall, I think black currants would be probably my number one choice overall, because as you can see, black currants have an incredibly dark, almost black. They're really a very, very dark purple, but they're described as black because of how concentrated anthocyanins are in the skin of the black currant. Now, of course, black currants aren't really considered to be a common fruit, so that's why they're often left off some of these charts, and they have less sweetness, a really, really strong flavor. So that's another reason why they're not consumed as regularly as some other fruits. You could say the same thing about elderberries, which elderberries have incredible medicinal use, but they are really high in their alkaloids, so they can't be consumed raw. They need to be cooked thoroughly to address some of that alkaloid content. They're not as sweet as other fruits. So again, leaving some of those more esoteric fruits off of the list, and you get down to really your more common berries as being your most concentrated and commonly consumed foods. And blueberries are, again, that's the fruit that when I was working at the University of Maine, I was working with like the Tufts University Center on Aging and Disease Prevention. This is the blueberry is the one that we focused on because it was the food in North America that had the highest anthocyanin content and was also widely available, could be consumed in a wide variety of fashions, whether that be raw, juiced, cooked to some extent, although heating does have an effect on anthocyanins. It can reduce the content. But, blueberries, bilberries, blackberries, would be the three, and pomegranates are becoming a little more common. But those would be the fruits that I would really say offer the greatest return and have the easiest, path to using. This is a chart that I really like that's in Advanced Nutrition from 2020 because it looks at popular fruit consumed and has what I consider to be, really accurate anthocyanin levels as have been confirmed through multiple analyses. So you can see here that blueberries are, at the top of the list, along with blackberries. And then, after that, you get into the darker plums and things like that. So again, I'm really showing you some of these different sources of anthocyanin content to reflect why sometimes you hear conflicting reports about what fruit is absolutely the best source of anthocyanins. You can include some lesser available, kind of more unique fruits or berries like elderberries and black currants, and absolutely I'm in agreement, those are incredible sources of anthocyanins. But when you look at the fruits that are more commonly available, very easy to consume, in a variety of ways, blueberries, both low bush and high bush, are really your best choices. And the area of our physiology, if we get down to this on the micro level, that's most important to protect with antioxidants, and where the research has clearly shown anthocyanins are an absolute superstar, it's the mitochondria. The reason that our brains change as we age, often in the wrong direction, right? Loss of cognitive function or impairment, not even getting into some of the neurodegenerative issues, it's loss of mitochondrial function. I mean, that, in conjunction with more senescent cells and, impaired circulation, right? Less blood flow to areas of the brain. You put these, 4 or 5 changes together as an individual ages, and it's really the perfect storm for the brain. But the loss of mitochondrial function, it's front and center. And mitochondria, in addition to just playing an important role in brain health as we age, we know that mitochondrial dysfunction is at the core of so many diseases, a lot of which are neurological or neurodegenerative, but it's also really a big part of cancer. Cancer could easily be looked at as a chronic disease. Often it's not portrayed that way, but it's really clear that mitochondrial dysfunction is a huge component to cancer. So it's a critical area of our physiology that often doesn't receive enough attention. And it is, to restate this, it's the reason why antioxidants, antioxidant-rich fruits and vegetables, and anthocyanins in particular are so protective. The reason our mitochondria are often impaired as we get older is that they're constantly exposed to toxins from our diet or from our gut microbiome. For instance, we know that blue-green algae and blue-green algae contaminated foods and water that people are often exposed to, whether they're drinking it or recreating on it, boating, water skiing, swimming, eating the fish from blue-green algae contaminated water. It's a huge cause of Parkinson's and ALS because of the way those toxins in that blue-green algae affect someone over the course of their lifespan. A lot of individuals have a loss of mitochondrial health because of really such high levels of dietary carbohydrates, simple sugars, and becoming so dependent on that as their primary source of metabolic fuel. So they lose that metabolic flexibility, and this is really important with neurological health. And then, of course, there's other toxins as well. We know the artificial sweeteners really can take their toll on the mitochondria. Heavy metals, of course, lead, really being a big cause of mitochondrial myopathies. So the mitochondria are constantly insulted and are really receiving the brunt of a modern lifestyle and the environmental components to that. And so protecting those mitochondria is a big part of trying to provide an individual with an improved outcome or an optimal quality of life. And eventually, that loss of mitochondrial function, which you see at the very center of this slide, causes neuronal death. And then you just can't take care of any area of cellular physiology. You can't repair the DNA that's important for transcription. You can't repair that DNA without adequate ATP production, and that ATP, of course, has to come from the mitochondria. So it's a chain reaction, and it's not just limited to neurological health. It's a big part of cardiovascular health. Cardiac tissue requires high levels of ATP to function properly, and we know that in a lot of different versions of cardiovascular disease, there is impaired metabolism, ATP production, and the mitochondria of cardiac tissue is impaired. The same thing with our liver as well. So look, it's critical. We focus on the brain most often when we talk about the ability for antioxidant-rich foods to improve life, to improve outcomes, to offer disease protection, because we've got this growing body of clinical evidence that clearly illustrates how that ratio of oxidants to antioxidants, or oxidative stress to antioxidants in our diet and what our bodies produce, that balance is now more than ever being tipped in favor of oxidative stress, less and less protection being provided by a diet which is really it's not containing the levels of antioxidants that our ancestors would have consumed. And you don't have to go back to the Stone Age, you don't have to go back to a Paleolithic time to find marked differences in the levels of antioxidants that are consumed now in comparison to our ancestors. 200 years ago, the levels of vegetables and minimally processed plants and berries was much, much higher than it is now. Now people eat just so much more processed, heavily refined food that is absent. It's just void of molecules such as anthocyanins and polyphenols and these incredibly protective and dynamic molecules. They're, for a large percentage of the populations now living in an industrialized, heavily processed world, food-wise, they're just absent. And so because of that, our brains are the organ which are clearly suffering at an accelerated rate. And there's, again, just an amazing amount of clinical research that illustrates that. So it's that ratio. Alzheimer's disease, of course, has an inflammatory component. It has a very, very high level of oxidative stress at the core of the disease, with the inflammation and the amyloid tangles that arise as a result of that oxidative stress. The initiation and activation of the NF-κB, nuclear factor kappa B, and how that causes those microglial tangles and damage. But as you can see on the far right of this slide, in animal studies, and I'm going to share some really amazing research in a moment that goes back to 1999, blueberries and anthocyanins in general, anthocyanin-rich foods, have the ability to arrest or really ameliorate that reactive oxygen species formation that accelerates the formation of those amyloid tangles and those plaques, which are, that's really the stage of Alzheimer's where a patient tends to turn the corner for the worst. So there's that component, that oxidative stress component, where anthocyanins are bar none the most potent molecules out there to help stop the propagation of many diseases. So this is that early study that I was referring to. And James Joseph, the late James Joseph, who was absolutely a pioneer in the discovery of anthocyanins, in research and initial investigations as to how foods rich in anthocyanins offered protection to both animals and humans. And so his research started in the late 80s at Tufts University. He was a mentor to much of my PhD work. I taught with Dr. Joseph, for the Center for Mind Body Medicine out of Washington, D.C. And he shared his research with me while I was in the early stages of my PhD work. And these 4 slides, I think, are very powerful because they will show you what the difference in dendritic branching looks like in a mouse that's around 18 months old, and that's equivalent to a human being in their 80s. Okay, so what Dr. Joseph did is he fed mice and other animals as well, and then I did some of this with humans and looked at how that blueberry consumption influenced various areas of a woman's health. But what Dr. Joseph did initially is he fed mice blueberries at around 3% of their diet, which would be like an average adult human consuming around 100 grams per day when you look at it that way. So 3% of a mouse's diet containing blueberries versus other plants, or a controlled diet which didn't have any anthocyanin content or any unique plant. And what he showed was that if you look at the neuron, here's a neuron, and you can see all the branches coming out of the neuron. Those are the dendrites, right? And the more branched a neuron can be, in essence, the better that neuron will function. And of course, our brains are the collective sum, or in total, our brains will function like the individual unit of our brain, the neuron function. So we're really going to be, at the end, our brain's going to function at the same level of the individual unit that makes those, that organ up. So here's a neuron and all the dendrites with an animal that did not receive the blueberries, and then look at how highly branched. You can see all the nodules that are present on the dendrites of this mouse, which received blueberries at 3% of its diet. Again, that's like you or I eating about 100 grams or a little over a cup a day. And you can look at this more closely. We take a look at the individual dendrite, and you can see those nodules. Again, here's a mouse that didn't receive blueberries, and no blueberries in its diet. And here's a mouse that received the blueberries at 3%, and much higher concentration of those nodules on a dendrite, which ultimately can form branches for other dendrites that are going to be more far-reaching and are going to allow that neuron to communicate more effectively with other neurons, and in the case of neuromuscular junction, stimulate greater neuromuscular coordination. So again, we have so many different ways to look at anthocyanins and their ability to protect our health. We can look at this. We can also look at the mitochondria, like I just mentioned. And it's not strictly limited to neurological health. This is a great paper that's in the journal Molecules. It's a very recent one from earlier this year, and it looks at how anthocyanins have the ability to prevent both obesity and type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. And again, there's different mechanisms here, from the oxidative stress component to something that's very different, which is the effect that anthocyanins have on the microbiome. The microbiome obviously has an enormous role in the development of insulin resistance. And when you look at the families of bacteria, which are clearly associated with more insulin sensitivity, which is, again, less insulin resistance, you have Akkermansia, you can see here, second from the bottom, as being one of those families of bacteria with an incredible body of clinical evidence supporting its role as a protective molecule. And of course, Clostridium being a high risk family of bacteria, meaning that it increases individuals' risk for developing insulin resistance and subsequently obesity. Well, dietary anthocyanins, this has been shown with blueberries, blackberries, cranberries at a higher rate than even the others, and raspberries. All four of those families of berries have been shown to decrease Clostridium levels and to increase Akkermansia as well as Bifidobacter populations in the guts of individuals that have been put on various levels of berries in their diet. It's also been shown with animals, and that has incredible effects. Number one is when you increase those families of bacteria, especially Bifidobacter and Akkermansia, you immediately have, as a result, a better gut barrier, which in turn is going to let less endotoxins and lipopolysaccharides into circulation. That's going to be very protective. And then, of course, you have, by having more of those families of bacteria, you're going to have higher levels of short chain fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory and have been shown to decrease adipose tissue levels and the formation of adipose tissue, even in animals and humans, which have similar levels of glycemic control. So a lot of different mechanisms that work here, from the microbiome to the antioxidant, less oxidative stress and the effects there. But again, it's not just neurological protection, it's protection against obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and here ulcerative colitis, because of how anti-inflammatory anthocyanins and berries are against that, that really debilitating gut wall inflammation and autoimmune issue that arises with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So just so many different reasons to make anthocyanin-rich berries, fruits, vegetables a part of our patient's diet one way or another. And this is a slide, this is one of my favorites, because it shows you the different molecules and mechanisms that anthocyanins and polyphenols, this is specific to blueberries, and the diseases that have been clearly shown to have risk reductions occur when higher levels of blueberries are in the diet, animal and human studies collectively here. So you can see it's a much longer list of chronic diseases where risk reduction has been illustrated. But cardiovascular disease is a big one, and a lot of that has to do with the ability for blueberries to protect those small dense LDLs from that initial oxidation that allows the LDLs to infiltrate the artery lining, but many others here. So this is a really good summary slide. It's a 2018 paper in that International Journal of Molecular Science. That being said, there's a lot of different ways to incorporate blueberries into your diet, your patient's diet. Smoothies are a great way. I think smoothies are a great way to combine these wonderful attributes of berries with other ingredients, right? It could be some type of starchy root vegetable like a beet. You could use pumpkin, obviously. I know people use canned pumpkin with blueberries to really give that blueberry smoothie some body. Avocados are, of course, another phenomenal ingredient that would provide healthy fat, really unique phenols, as well as some of those plant sterols that are found in avocados. Of course, yogurt is a great thing to combine berries with, whether you make a smoothie or not. Typically, when you cook berries, boiling berries for 5 to 10 minutes, which is the case when people make jams and things like that, you tend to reduce that anthocyanin content by somewhere in the area of 40 to 50%. So there are some casualties that occur with anthocyanins in prolonged cooking in that case. That being said, there's still significant levels after cooking, but you just have to accept that there will be some losses. Freezing blueberries, an excellent way to both source them. Buying frozen berries is great. They're really, in many cases, have antioxidant levels and viable anthocyanin counts that are just as good as fresh. The reason being, Many frozen berries are picked at a point of peak ripeness. So the berries are picked when they're at their absolute sweetest level. You know, that's really what a berry grower wants their consumer to receive, is the sweetest berry possible. And that's when they often have the highest anthocyanin content. They're at their peak ripeness. The reason that that often works in our favor as a consumer is if you buy fresh berries, in some cases, those berries are picked a little bit prior to their being at that peak ripeness, because when they're really at peak ripeness, they're also really the most easily damaged, the most susceptible to transportation damage, right? Because they're so soft, their skins might be a little thinner. And so because of the potential for damage during transportation, many growers will pick them when they're just before they're at peak ripeness. And so they might not have that same level of darkness in their skin, the same level of anthocyanins as they would if they were picked and immediately frozen. You know, again, this is just some, you know, I think some interesting, you know, facts here about blueberries and the different ways they can be sourced. But keep in mind that the berry skins, you know, the skins of blueberries, bilberries, the skins of, you know, obviously some other fruits we've talked about, like black currants, blackberries, that's where you find that real high level of concentration. So you don't, you know, you don't want to use, you know, products, let's say a blueberry jam where the skins were removed. You really want to find berry products where the skins of the berry are included in that final product. But again, it's always a topic that I enjoy, you know, talking about and discussing so much, because here you have a whole food that, you know, of course, there's been an effort to make a drug out of anthocyanins, but really you just want to, if you can, get that amazing myriad of benefits that you find in berries. Anthocyanins are just one part of a blueberry's overall, you know, just wonderful complex antioxidants and phytonutrients. There's chlorogenic acid in blueberries. You have ellagic acid in raspberries. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of those wonderful attributes. Resveratrol, which most people know, you know, are found in things like, you know, red grapes and obviously in wine. Well, there's resveratrol in high concentrations in the skin of a blueberry. It's also found in blackberries and in raspberries. So it's not really, when we talk about anthocyanins, it's not the only antioxidant, and it's not the only polyphenol found in these dark berries. There are so many others that collectively, you know, work at a level that's, again, I think unparalleled. Remember, the sum of, you know, really the sum of these parts it's just much, much greater effects than I think we can appreciate. So that's why I'm always in favor of people eating whole, organic, whenever possible, berries, as opposed to, you know, taking supplements where they may have, you know, claims around high concentrations of anthocyanins. But, you know, the research on taking anthocyanins as a supplement in a more of a pharmacological fashion is much less clear. I think that there's some serious questions, I should say, that need to be answered before that's should be accepted as a viable route to risk reduction for diseases. I think, you know, it's been clearly established that eating dark, brightly colored vegetables and fruits, in the case of berries, that it offers just incredible benefits to human health, and we just don't have that type of data as of yet with supplements that contain some of these refined molecules. So with that, I really want to thank you for your interest in this today, and I look forward to, I'll try to answer any questions that I can.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Bagnulo. This is Laura Doherty. So I'm going to moderate the question and answer session. And we have a lot of questions here. So thankfully, we have about 20 minutes. So we hopefully should get through all of them. And I want to start, Dr. Bagnulo, since you just gave a really good summary of, you know, the cooking process and what that does to anthocyanins. What about the dried fruits? Is there anything in the processing of dried fruits that would reduce the anthocyanin content?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many different ways to dry fruits or berries, I should say. And freeze drying is actually, it's a fairly effective preservation method when it comes to antioxidant value of berries and anthocyanins in particular. So I would say freeze drying would be superior to any other form of drying. If you get into the longer, slower drying methods, you're going to have some casualties because there'll be some, there'll be more exposure to oxygen, with some of those other drying methods. But that being said, they're still going to have significant antioxidant and anthocyanin content even after longer, slower drying methods. So those are good. I think the one thing that I would say though, Laura, is that it's really important for individuals to understand, if you buy dried blueberries, if you were to buy those, most of those have been treated with some form of sweetener, because berries are, while they're sweet, they do still have some tartness that that like dried blueberry manufacturers and processors want to neutralize with a sugar or a sweetener. So they often are sweetened, and they often have some type of vegetable oil added to them to keep them from sticking together. So you want to make sure that if you do buy a dried blueberry product, that you read the label and make sure those things aren't included.
Okay, great. And do you know, one of the questions here is about powdered berries. Do you know anything in terms of, do powdered berries, and obviously we want to encourage whole foods, but when they're processing a powdered berry product, are the skins removed or intact in terms of retaining that anthocyanin content?
There's both versions out there. There are blueberry powders that have the skin left in the process, and then there are also some blueberry powders out there where they've been more refined and processed. You can typically tell when you look at them, they have a much lighter color. They have almost no pigmentation in comparison to the ones that have the skin. So they're both out there. It's just important to try to find that out from the producer, the manufacturer.
Okay. And can you explain any nutritional differences between wild blueberries and not wild blueberries, and also high bush or low bush varieties?
Yeah, absolutely. Low bush are going to be much more representative of wild blueberries. They're much smaller in size. So because of that, because they're much smaller in size, there's an enormous difference in surface area. If you have a cup of low bush or a cup of wild blueberries, there are many more blueberries in that cup than there would be with high bush or what we call cultivated varieties. And so because of that, it's all about surface area. If there's more surface area, then there's more skins of the berries in that cup of low bush or wild blueberries. So they have much higher antioxidant and higher anthocyanin levels. And I think there was a slide earlier on the slideshow that compared low bush to high bush, and that's really the difference was like 345 to 245. So there's more like a 30 to 40% difference there in anthocyanin content, the low bush having much more.
Okay. And your take on organic versus non-organic berries in terms of anthocyanin content?
Very important. Very important to choose organic berries, and for the most part, this is across the board, because organic berries, number one, do not contain the agrochemical, which can have its own associated risks with it. Number two, whenever we spray a vegetable or a fruit with some type of pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, there are unintended consequences on the nutritional value of that plant. And the reason being is plants defend themselves. I really describe the process of how anthocyanins protect berries in particular, and the eggplant would be another great example, how the anthocyanin serves as a sunscreen and protects the flesh of the fruit against ultraviolet light. Well, chemicals applied to plants in order to kill pests or prevent some type of fungal infection on the plant, what those do is they will inadvertently, they're going to prevent that plant from producing compounds that would be necessary for protection. So we remove that quality from a particular plant, and that's why organic versions of most fruits and vegetables typically have been shown to have higher levels of polyphenols and other antioxidants, which we know have, which we have very important roles in that plant's survival and in defending itself in that environment. So I think there's two reasons why you want to choose organic berries. Number one is they're going to have higher levels of polyphenols. Number two, they're not going to contain some of those harmful agrochemicals.
Excellent. Okay, next question, and we keep getting a lot of great questions in here, so we'll get to as many as we can. Is there a recommended daily intake of anthocyanins to help protect against oxidative stress?
No, today we don't really have an RDA or recommended amount. I would say that from my research at the University of Maine, again, around the year 2000, 2001, we fed our team there, we fed women that were over the age of 60, 100 grams of blueberries per day. And again, we did this as a human pilot study follow-up to what the late Dr. Joseph did there at Tufts University. That would be around, again, 3% of an average person's diet. And what we observed in the area of women's health was phenomenal. I mean, blood antioxidant levels, meaning a woman's blood antioxidant levels, how much she could defend her body's tissues against free radicals, significantly higher than those women who weren't consuming the blueberries. We also looked at the amount of oxidized DNA base pairs that can be measured in urine, much lower levels of oxidative stress in a woman's body when consuming 100 grams of blueberries. So, I have that empirical evidence to go on that 100 grams is very effective at producing significant physiological differences in a woman's levels of oxidative stress. I would say that would be a good starting point, Laura. 100 grams, a little over a cup a day. I think that if we all were to set that as a goal for dark berries, I think everybody's going to be at a better place.
Okay, great. I think that's a great quantitative thing we can all probably hopefully do. Going back to the organic question, this attendee asked, organic farming uses certain chemicals that are approved for organic farming. Do these substances affect the anthocyanin levels?
It's possible, but most of the allowed or organic approved, approved by organic certification governing bodies, those do not have the same type of role in terms of altering a plant's defense system. Those are often used, the compounds that are used often have more to do with soil, the soil qualities and things along those lines. So I know I wouldn't be concerned with those.
Okay, great. Can you speak to anthocyanins' role in cancer and if blueberries specifically have any impact on raising white blood cell count?
Yeah, the latter part of that question, I'm not familiar with any research that shows blueberries would alter white blood cell counts. That may be out there, but I'm just not familiar with it. In terms of cancer risk reduction, yes, we know that blueberries and anthocyanins, in particular, have a unique ability to, number one, help prevent cancer by preventing the initiation stage, which is the mutagenic component. Often, that's where the things start. Also, anthocyanins have the ability to help support tissue differentiation. That is also very important. It helps prevent a tumor from forming, even if you do have, maybe the initiation phase that's already happened. Anthocyanins have some anti-angiogenesis properties, so they can help prevent the blood flow or the development of blood vessels into a tumor. So you've got initiation, preventing that's important, obviously, that's at the very early stages. Preventing tumor formation by helping tissues differentiate, not become, that cancerous mass. and then of course helping prevent the blood flow into tumors, which we call angiogenesis, very important. So we've got, there are research papers demonstrating the protective role of anthocyanins and blueberries in all three phases of that cancer etiology.
Okay, thank you so much. Switching gears here to talk a little bit, we have several questions about vegetables. So in terms of how do these vegetables measure up to blueberries and the other berries? Beets, purple lettuce or kale, red cabbage. So how do those kind of measure up comparatively in terms of anthocyanins to the fruits we've been talking about?
Yeah, red cabbage is a decent source, but it's not nearly as concentrated as you'll find in most of those berries. Kale, I'm not aware of anthocyanins being there at any significant level. Beets, some. Beets, unfortunately, get much more of their color from another family of phytonutrients, not so much from anthocyanins. There are some there, but it's not as concentrated as one would think based on the color of beets. But red cabbage, yeah, radicchio, absolutely, they contain some. There are some other, like I mentioned, the skin of an eggplant. They have some. There are some in tomatoes, but again, they're much lower levels across most vegetables than you're going to find in berries.
Okay. Do you know how much anthocyanins or even polyphenols in general are lost when you're pan frying, such as like eggplant and olive oil?
It depends on the duration of time. The anthocyanins hold up for the first minute or two at even like sauteing and frying temperatures, but it's as I mentioned earlier with berries, once you cook them for, that after around 5 minutes or so, you start to get really significant losses. So I think it would just be a matter of how long. I think if you're going to take eggplant and saute that eggplant for a really long time, you're probably going to lose, as is the case with blueberries, you're going to lose 50 to 40% of the anthocyanin content there in the skin. It's not to say that it's still going to have significant value, but it's not going to be at the level it was when it was raw.
Okay. What about, so somebody's asking is in terms of elderberries, so there's a lot of elderberry supplements, elderberry juice. Do you know the processing of how people make elderberry juice? Is it heated? And once it's in that form, is that a good source of anthocyanins or not so much?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a great source of anthocyanins even after it's been heat processed, and it has to be heat processed because elderberries are such a rich source of this family of molecules we call alkaloids that they can cause significant GI disturbances. I'm sure. Well, I'm sure somewhere, in our group of participants today, someone I certainly as a kid ate elderberries off the bush to the point where I vomited. I was a young child and I found elderberries. They taste pretty good, so I was eating them, off a bush. Ate much more than I should have, and I experienced real severe vomiting later that evening. And that's because of the alkaloid content. And a lot of people have experienced this. It's not life-threatening per se, like the alkaloids found in some other plants that are highly toxic, but it is still a significant GI irritant, the alkaloids in elderberry. So they have to be cooked, and they have to be cooked for 15 to 20 minutes. So you're going to lose anthocyanins with that amount of heat processing. But as you saw earlier in the slides, there's such a high concentration of anthocyanins in elderberries that even when you lose half, and let's say you use 3/4, if you lose 75% of the anthocyanins when you make elderberry juice and you cook it down to where it can be used medicinally, it's still a remarkable source. So you have to process elderberries, but the good news is there's such a high concentration of anthocyanins to begin with that even after long heat processing, you still end up with a significant level.
Awesome. You mentioned a little bit about you talked a lot about mitochondrial function, and it's such an interesting concept. Are there any labs that you recommend that can reflect mitochondrial function, or are we not there yet in terms of the science?
Well, I mean, I think we're there, like theoretically. There's different organic acid tests that some people, some functional physicians, for instance, recommend that they feel reflect aspects of mitochondrial health, and I just don't think it's a widely agreed upon, laboratory panel. But organic acids are one area of testing that many functional physicians feel could be used potentially to assess mitochondrial health. But no, I don't think we're there quite yet, like we all hope we would be at this point in time.
Okay. And you mentioned black currants as being a really, really high source of anthocyanins, but not something we commonly consume in the typical American diet. So where do you feel like we can work black currants into a diet? Is it a dried black currant? What are kind of the options there?
Yeah, well, you can buy them when they're in season. You can buy them in various areas of our country. I mean, here in Vermont, we find them at our local co-op, and you'll see them sometimes at farm stands. Look, black currants are incredible. I'm not in any way trying to slight them by saying that they're not widely available, but you just don't find them in grocery stores, and you don't find them like you do blueberries and raspberries and blackberries. I wish that were not the case, because I think that they're exceptional on so many levels. I mean, anthocyanins is just the tip of the iceberg. Black currants have incredible medicinal value. You can find them frozen online. There are a number of different purveyors of organic and conventional black currants. There's black currant jam. There are a lot of different black currant products out there. Again, they have such a high concentration of anthocyanins to begin with that even after making jam with them, it's just remarkable the levels that are left. Bilberries are the same way. Bilberries and black currants they're your top two sources, but bilberries are tough to find. There is a wonderful bilberry jam made in Italy that I see at a lot of health food stores and co-ops. That's a great source of bilberries. There's a company out in the northwest of the United States, out in the Pacific Northwest, that does sell wild bilberries. They sell black currants. They sell a variety of these really amazing dark berries in frozen form, very, very high quality. So they're out there, but you really are going to have to either find them online, or you're going to have to find them in season when they're available locally.
Okay, great. And our last question that we're going to have time for probably is, what about mulberries, goji berries, and prunes?
Yeah, so prunes are, they're basically plums that have been dried. They can have significant, I did show plums on one of those slides there earlier. Dark plums can have, really significant anthocyanin contents, especially when they're dried and they're concentrated. Mulberries and goji berries, yeah, not as much, right? Because not with goji berries anyways, because goji berries tend to have less of that purple color. But mulberries can have significant anthocyanin contents. Absolutely, it would be similar to a blackberry at the end of the day.
Okay, great. And I guess we do have time for one more question here. What are your thoughts on the products that are advertised as like fruit/vegetable pills? Where do you think, if any of those, have a role in intake, and how do they?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, Laura. There's so many products out there that claim to have, um, so many servings of fruits and vegetables in this one capsule. I guess I'd say I'm skeptical. I mentioned earlier that freeze drying a berry with the skin on, it can provide a significant anthocyanin content. And you remove all that water and you can concentrate them and you can get that down into a powder. And I think there's some value there. But at the same time, once that fruit is not only freeze dried, but ground up into a fine powder, it's exposed to oxygen. You're going to lose something with that. And I'm just not sure at the end of the day if I guess what I want to say here is I couldn't answer broadly to this and say that all of those products are good. I've seen some products out there that, when you read the description, how it's manufactured, it looks pretty sound. And then I've seen some other products out there that make what I feel are some very outlandish claims, as to what you're going to receive in one capsule of a particular supplement. And I just, again, I always try to encourage whatever group it is I'm working with or teaching, I always really try to convey that message of eat whole, minimally processed, vegetables and fruits. And, cooking is fine because cooking can often bring a vegetable or fruit to a place where we can actually eat it more conveniently, safely. But when you get into trying to make a drug out of a food, usually it doesn't go in the right direction. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
I think that's a perfect answer. I fully agree with you. As an RD, I think I'm skeptical as well. So I totally agree. Well, that is all we have for time today. Dr. Bagnulo, thank you so much for all of your information, answering all those questions. I'm sorry if your question didn't get answered. We had 20 minutes and I thought we'd get through them all, but you guys had such wonderful questions. I will draw your attention to this slide. We do have 2 more opportunities for CPEU credit. One on July 13th that will specifically cover the cerebral palsy population and blenderized tube feeding. So a very clinical oriented webinar. And then we have on August 2nd, Dr. Bagnulo will be back with us talking about fiber and carbohydrates in terms of health outcomes. So check us out on our website to register for those. I will send out everybody's CPE certificate by the end of the day today. And we will also have a full list of references available on that email. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Bagnulo, again, thank you so much. You're amazing and just a wealth of knowledge. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Laura. You as well.
Thank you.